Welcome back to another episode of Talking Capitalism. Today, we're talking capitalism with Professor Alex Khasnabish, who is also the chair of sociology and anthropology at Mount St. Vincent University. Alex has at least 6, maybe 7. I've lost count books. 2 of these books are on various aspects of the Zapatistas and Zapatismo. He's got some wicked edited volumes, some of which I'm sure we'll be looking at in the course of our class. I've had the good fortune to actually write a book with Alex, which is called Frequently Asked White Questions. And yeah, he's a prolific local scholar and activist. I'll let him kind of introduce himself as he deems fit in a moment. But Alex, welcome and thank you for joining us for Talking Capitalism.
Yeah, AJ, thanks so much for the invitation. So happy to be here. Hello, students watching this.
So the first question we've got for you, Alex, is to tell us a little bit about, how capitalism emerged in your kind of personal life and your professional life. How'd you come to understand this thing?
That's, yeah, for sure. Great question. I've been mulling this over in preparation for our conversation today, thinking about it. And really, for me, I have a hard time remembering when sort of my consciousness around this started in some ways, because it seems so foundational to me. And not in some big, scholarly way, but just because I grew up, so I grew up in Toronto, in Ontario, and my parents were sort of solidly socially and culturally middle class, but a year after my birth or so, my dad fell in some really hard times financially, lost his business, was basically economically unstable for the rest of his life. And he'd come to Canada as a something of an economic refugee. He wasn't a political refugee, but he was certainly traveling abroad in order to make money, send it back to the family back in India. And so my early life was characterized, before I think I could even really talk about it quite literally, I was characterized by sort of a sense of uncertainty around housing, around property, around, just how my parents were feeling in that moment too. My dad did, not to make this too autobiographical, I suppose, but my dad really did declare bankruptcy at a certain point. So my mom, I think, was quite understandably freaked out about that. But like many middle-class people, the reason that I think I was saved from, the real kind of cutting edges of all that was because I had grandparents, and my grandparents owned a house in Scarborough, and they took care of us when my folks didn't have enough money to do that. But so I was never really, in danger of being houseless or whatever. But I think, those early experiences just with that connection between you need money in this society in order to basically secure your human dignity became really early lessons. And also what not having it, the stress of not having it, the stress of feeling like a failure within it, which was a particularly true experience for my dad, what that does to people, sort of at a level of family life and everything. So for me, when you gave me that question and I started to put together my answer, I was where was it? Was it Public Enemy in high school? Was it, Marx? It was all those things. It was definitely stuff in the news. It was living through recessions. But for me, I think most foundationally, it comes back to those memories, of just of insecurity and fear and anxiety, that come out of that sort of mix of you're not okay and your human dignity can't be secured unless you have cash to pay for the stuff you need in this society.
So much anxiety, emerges out of that narrative. I can feel that anxiety, as we discuss it. Thank you for that, Alex. The next question is specifically about the wonderful text that you chose for us, which is, of course, No Shelter by Rage Against the Machine. So I've got 1,000 questions about it, but I want to just open it up for you to kind of tell us, why is this piece important for us to understand as we think about capitalism?
Yeah, for sure. Well, Rage Against the Machine, one of my favorite bands of all time, for sure. Just sort of segueing from the previous question, really my high school political education turning into university was very much like sort of informed by Rage Against the Machine and their amazing music and work. And so No Shelter comes from the Godzilla soundtrack several years after the band got started. But I love the like part of this story. Part of the thing that makes the song so good for me is the backstory too. Is like people are like, why is Rage Against the Machine, this big like angsty countercultural band, got a song on the Godzilla soundtrack? And I remember Zach De La Rocha, the front man from Rage Against the Machine, saying, studio time's expensive. Like we take whatever opportunity we can do to get behind, in the studio, to send that message of revolution and, like revolutionary transformation out there. And there's a line in No Shelter that just says, like references the film that the song is from. It says, Godzilla, pure motherfucking filler. Get your eyes on the real kid. And I just like, I always loved like that kind of like repurposing the mechanisms of capitalism to send something back out into the world. And anyway, like there was a lot of like people like, oh, they're hypocrites, they're working for a big studio, all this stuff. But it was so interesting. The song was such a hit. And the lyrics, have absolutely nothing to do with the movie, this giant radioactive lizard attacking humanity or saving humanity, depending upon the Godzilla movie, and everything about capitalism. But for me, I think the real amazing strength of the song, aside from like its awesome listenability, is just how like every lyric in the song reinforces that capitalism isn't just something like far away from us doing terrible things to kids in developing countries, or chewing up indigenous land and people, or destroying the rainforests, but it's like something that's immediately here, right? So the front line is everywhere, as Zach sings right throughout the song. And this idea that it's like what it's doing is creating a relationship between us and each other and the world. And that's almost like the most important thing that capitalism does. It like turns all those relationships that are important and sustaining, and sometimes actually not great, because humans can have all kinds of shitty relationships with each other and other forms of life, and it commodifies them and sells them back to you. So it's like one of the big, I think, messages in the song, right? This idea that what the culture industry sort of writ large wants to do under capitalism is to pacify you, to link you into these circuits of branding and saleability that make everything about your identity a commodity to be packaged, repackaged, sold, and resold. And I mean, I think kind of the amazing thing about this is looking back on this song from like 20 years ago now, is that it's only, further advanced. It's so much more like even, like 6 and 7 year olds on social media, horrifying as that idea is today, probably understand this kind of intuitively in a certain way, that, like you're constantly engaged in these circuits of branding, commodification, like the constant work to make yourself a valuable and desirable commodity under capitalism. And I just think the song is like, it hits every note. It's got some great references to history. It's got some great cultural industry references in there. It's a great like rousing call to arms. But it's also, I think, finally, the thing that I'd say about it is it's a reminder that capitalism needs us to do the work. Like there is no capitalism without humans being organized in these ways in relation to each other and the world. And so like what it wants most desperately, if I can attribute like agency to, an idea or a system of relations, is to like constantly make us do the work of reproducing it. And so our most powerful form of disruption is by recognizing that and then relating and building differently. So yeah, I just think the song is rad because of all that.
For sure. I mean, like we'll go through in class and we'll unpack it line by line, but even just, as you're describing this, I didn't realize that it came from the Godzilla soundtrack. So understanding the song with that background actually makes also hilarious, listening to like the words that they put in there, but there is this like critique of culture all the way through. And the line that always sticks out with me is makes you think that buying is rebelling.
Yes.
Self-commodification, the idea, like capitalism as an expansive cultural system actually gets inside of our minds to the point where we think our commodification and consumption is actually a form of rebellion. I mean,
For
it's
sure.
actually quite genius when you think about it
Yeah.
that way. Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely.
Well, Alex, we are down to our last question. And while I would love to think that students are hanging on every word of everything that we do all semester, it's likely that not all of them are going to retain everything that we talk about. So if I were to put you on the spot and say, what's one thing about capitalism that you think people should keep in mind as they move through the course of their degrees, what would that be?
Man, I guess like I'm going to do the typical academic thing and hedge and really offer you two things. So I think they dovetail. So
Mhm.
they start as one and become two. So that's how I'm cheating. So the first part of it is, I think, just to really keep very centrally in your mind that capitalism, like, it's not something that's like cut from whole cloth or descended from the sky and just dropped on us like a big like world consuming blanket. It's something that was like a way of relating to the world and to each other that has been cobbled together over actually quite a long period of time, over centuries, and that like it can be disassembled in similar kinds of ways, that we make it and remake it literally every day that we get out of bed and go and sell our labor somewhere else, or go and like participate in the commodification of our brand identity on Instagram or on whatever social media platform you have to be on. Like, we're constant, and that doesn't have to make you feel like an awful person for doing it. That's not what I want you to take away from that. What I
Mhm.
want you to take away from that is that literally, like, we are the agents of its manifestation. And so, like, if we stop playing along, it stops manifesting, right? The other thing that I guess I'd want them to keep in mind is just that, and this is something I find especially like earlier on in your thinking about capitalism, because this whole stuff that we've been talking about, but the culture aspect of it is so powerful. One thing that I think has made capitalism incredibly resilient and adaptive is its connection with these notions of happiness and choice and freedom and individuality. And one of the most cunning ways it sort of subverts, or its proponents subvert, our quest for alternatives is by saying, well, what do you want? You want somebody to own your toothbrush, your house, like, like to tell you you have to wear all the same clothes as everybody else. And I want just to remind people that there is no connection between freedom and capitalism. In fact, quite the opposite is true, as I hope like some of the stories that I was allowed to share today with you show, right? Like my childhood experience, like capitalism introduced an incredible insecurity and anxiety and stress, and like into the life of my family, into so many others lives as well, right? That's not freedom. It's not freedom to say you have to sell your labor and your life, quite literally, to somebody else who's willing to pay you something to do what they want you to do. Otherwise, you're going to freeze or starve. Like,
Right.
that's not freedom, right? So it doesn't mean you have to. I don't want to leave you with this nihilistic sense of like of unfreedom. But what I would love for you folks to take away, and just to keep very centrally in your mind, is this is like capitalism is something that we have been conscripted into, and we continue to make and remake, and it's something we can escape from and build the world otherwise. And and it doesn't mean we let go of things like happiness, choice, freedom, liberty. It just means we find a different way of achieving all of that.
Right on. Thank you so much for that, Dr. Khasnabish. We have been talking capitalism with Alex Khasnabish. Join us again next week when we'll talk to somebody else who's super cool. Thanks, Alex.
Thanks for having me. See you, folks.